discussion on the anti-export bias on international trade of Sri Lanka. On this occasion, we hope to engage in and develop a constructive dialogue to unravel the situation with Sri Lanka and its positioning in the realm of international trade, specifically in terms of our exports. To assist us in this endeavor, we are honored to be joined by Dr. M. Ganeshamoorthy from the University of Colombo, Dr. Asanka Wijesinghe from the Institute of Policy Studies, and Ms. Subhashini Abeysinghe from Verite Research. Moreover, we are also pleased to introduce Sahan Jayalath, an undergraduate of the University of Colombo, who will be moderating today's discussion. I don't want to take too long, as I'm sure everyone's here to listen from our panelists and are very eager to do so. As such, I will keep this brief and hand the reins back to our good friend Tarini. I hope this discussion proves to be fruitful for all of you gathered here today. Thank you very much. Tarini, over to you.
Thank you, Kavindi. Let me now invite the head of the Department of Economics, University of Colombo, Professor Chandana Alutke, to speak a few words.
Hi, good evening. I'm sorry, I'm still on the way home. I thought I would be able to reach home before 6, but due to heavy rains, I'm still on my way. But guest speakers, and first of all, let me congratulate Economic Students Association for organizing this timely discussion on anti-export bias in Sri Lanka. This has been a discussion in the last perhaps in the last 20 years or so, even though Sri Lanka is embarked on export development, but still the ground reality is that when one is going to start an export business, so there are so many hurdles. It is not an easy task. So then in that sense, this is very timely. And Economic Students Association lately have organized very interesting, timely discussions like these, different types of discussions. I would say this is a webinar, again a different type. So thank you very much for organizing these type of meetings, evenings, with intellectual discussions. And let me thank and welcome our panel, our presenters today, Ms. Subhashini Abeysinghe. She's not a she's a well-known person for Colombo University, and Dr. Asanka Wijesinghe. Thank you very much for time taken to be in the discussion, and Dr. M. Ganeshamoorthy and Mr. Sahan Jayalath for moderating this event. So wish you all the best to have a interesting discussion. So on my way home, I will hoping to listen to you, and then later I would come back if I have any questions during the question sessions. So then yes, that's it from me. So I'm actually very happy, and wish all of you all the very best, and we are hoping to have many the event of this nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now that we've completed the formalities of today's session, let us get on to the main event. With that, I would like to leave you in the capable hands of our moderator for today, Mr. Sahan Jayalath. Over to you, Sahan.
Thank you very much, Tarini. First and foremost, can someone please confirm if I'm visible and audible? Yes, I guess I'm both visible and audible to everyone.
Yes,
both. Brilliant. As we all know, the Economic Students Association of the University
Sahan, I believe you accidentally muted yourself. You might want to start.
Great. Am I audible? I guess I am.
Yes.
You are all good.
So, okay, as you all know, the Economic Students Association of the University of Colombo always takes the responsibility of presenting to the academic field the most valuable and enriching endeavors. So I would like to welcome you all once again to today's event based on the theme, the anti-export bias of international trade in Sri Lanka. My name is Sahan Jayalat, and I will be the moderator of today's session. Sri Lanka's position in the field of international trade is definitely an area to have a conversation about. While it's a topic that receives extensive discussion, sometimes it feels like discussions that revolve around the specific matters seem to be far and in between with the general public when compared to the certain other economic occurrences. So much so that a good portion of the general public may not even be aware of the complications that may arise, provided that Sri Lanka does not address or change its approach in trading with the rest of the world. Thus, with this session, we are trying to hopefully remedy that by diving headfirst into the realm of international trade and Sri Lanka's place in it. We are confident that today's session will bring together a range of ideas, viewpoints, and opinions on how best Sri Lanka should tackle this issue. However, don't take it from me. No, because today we are accompanied by three exceptional individuals whose profound insights are certain to broaden our understanding of the subject at hand. And thus, for this session, once again, we have with us Dr. M. Ganeshamoorthy from the University of Colombo, Dr. Asanka Wijesinghe from the Institute of Policy Studies, and Ms. Subhashini Abeysinghe from Verite Research. Dear panelists, we are ecstatic and truly grateful to have you all with us today. Before we hear from our esteemed panelists, however, let me outline how our discussion will unfold. So this discussion comprises 3 rounds. In the first round, we will be joined by Dr. M. Ganeshamoorthy and Dr. Asanka Wijesinghe, while Ms. Subhashini Abeysinghe will join us from the second round. In the first round, each panelist will have 15 minutes to present their views on the topic. During the second round, they will have 10 minutes to expand their views and engage with each of the other panelists' ideas. At the end of their speeches in this round, the panelists may clearly present their stance. Following this, in the third round, you, the audience, will have the opportunity to pose your questions to the panelists. If you have any questions for the panelists during the first and second rounds, please feel free to send them via the chat box to the account named as question. These questions will be addressed during the Q&A session. If you prefer to vocalize your question, please wait until the designated Q&A session where we will be able to vocalize your question. Moreover, when sending in or vocalizing your questions, please mention if you would like a specific panelist's opinion on that, or if you'd like it to all 3 of them. Additionally, please adhere to the following housekeeping rules. So, dear panelists, please note that the reminders of your remaining time will be sent via the chat box, one at 10 minutes, another at 14 minutes, and a final reminder when your allotted 15 minutes are up. Lastly, a gentle reminder to our audience members to maintain decorum and avoid disrupting or interrupting the speakers during their presentations. With that out of the way, let us now begin our discussion. Why don't we start by hearing from someone who is very near and dear to us here at the University of Colombo, someone who has been a pillar of support to us here at the university through and through. You all know him. He's, of course, Senior Lecturer Dr. M. Ganeshamoorthy. Dr. M. Ganeshamoorthy is a distinguished economist with extensive professional experience spanning over 3 decades. He holds a BA Honours degree in economics from the University of Peradeniya, a postgraduate diploma in economic development from the University of Colombo, and a Master of Arts in Economics from the same institution. Dr. Ganeshamoorthy furthered his academic pursuits by earning a PhD in finance from the Catholic University of Nijmegen in the Netherlands. Throughout his illustrious career, he has been a permanent academic staff member at the University of Colombo and has held significant positions, such as the director of the Colombo University Community Extension Center and director of postgraduate studies at the Faculty of Arts. In the private sector, he served as the dean at North Shore College, facilitating degree programs at the University of West England. Dr. Ganeshamoorthy's contribution to national development are noteworthy, as he has served as a resource person at esteemed institutions like the National Institute of Education, Kotalawala Defense University, and Defense Staff College, I would say. He's a lifetime member of the Sri Lanka Economic Association and a regular contributor to various media outlets, including the BBC, Al Jazeera, and local newspapers such as Tinakaran and Virakesari. Additionally, he has served as the former secretary to the Ministry of National Integration and Reconciliation of the Government of Sri Lanka, demonstrating his commitment to the public service and policy making. With that being said, Doctor, it is always a pleasure to have you with us, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction and the invitation extended to me to participate in this particular webinar. When I got this invitation, I immediately responded that the most suitable person is someone else, because on this particular topic, anti-export bias in international trade of Sri Lanka, a postgraduate level MPhil thesis has been published in the late 90s, in the Netherlands, by one of our senior colleagues, Professor Siriman Abhiram. So, and he is the best person to spoke on this particular topic, but busy commitment, I think I have to talk about this particular topic and then reflect on certain issues that Sri Lanka is currently encountering. So any study on international trade pertaining to Sri Lanka, we kindly boast our image as a kind of a exporter of tea and tea, rubber, coconut, the three product export. And then in the 1970s, late 1970s onwards, garments. So whatever we talk about Sri Lanka's export composition, until recently, that revolve around these three products plus garment. But when you look at the recent export composition of Sri Lanka, you can see 76% of Sri Lankan exports are industrial export rather than primary or agricultural exports. So we can argue that Sri Lanka's export composition has been transformed from a primary agricultural exporter to an industrial exporter status. But even today, if you look at the recent data published by the Central Bank, export-import data recently, our export has gone down the last month, while the imports have increased. And we had a positive trade balance a few months ago, thanks to or non-thanks to the import restriction policies of the government of Sri Lanka after 2022. So we basically depend on a few export commodities, and even though they are very not very value added export commodities, industrial product, but we have kind of a initial primary kind of industrial exports, even though we have 76% as the industrial exporter status we have already achieved. So since 1970s, late 70s, Sri Lankan economy has undergone tremendous changes in its economic structure and its political structure as well, which go in hand with the expectation that the country will become a major exporter in South Asia, because the other countries in South Asia were not liberalized their economies up to until 1990s. So therefore, Sri Lanka has been one of the pioneers in the export trade liberalization and export promotion, embracing export promotion policies. But yet, there has been a kind of a slow growth or a kind of lethargic attempt to make the country as an exporter of value-added or high-value export commodities. Now, the problem here is why Sri Lanka is failed. I would say that I would prefer the word failed to achieve the expected export growth as a country which started earlier than any South Asian countries in the region, and sometimes in par with the East Asian countries. But the export performance of Sri Lanka is no way closer to our close rivals of the East Asian countries. Now, one of the major issues they talk about is the anti-export bias existing in Sri Lanka's export sector. Now, that is the reason why I think the students have correctly picked up this particular topic and then wanted to focus on this particular concept. In this presentation, my part would be to define what is meant by this anti-export bias in a simple terms, not using the very technical terms, and the technical terms can be picked up by the other two speakers. Just introducing the concept in a very simple manner. So any student who is not known about anything about international trade also can understand the concept. So let me introduce the concept of this anti-export bias, and then why this is happening and how this anti-export bias can be eliminated or reduced or removed from a country. Now, this is not about the problem of a production. The countries produce various things. Tea, rubber, coconut, maybe, or a garment, or anything else countries can produce. So sometimes we say that we don't have enough production. So whatever we produce is inadequate for local consumption. So how could we export? And this is not about the product that we produce less in quantities. So we are unable to export. So we are talking about a product which is meant for the export market as well, and domestically also is consumed. Now, when you produce, if you are a producer, you have two things or two options available to you. One, you can sell this product in the domestic market, local market, and by selling that, you can earn a price. And with that price, you compare the cost and you will get a price calculation and cost calculation and a profit calculation also you can make. Second option available at you, you export this. And when you export this, what you get is the foreign currency. And you convert this foreign currency in Sri Lankan rupee, compare this with the cost, and then calculate the profit by exports. So these are the two options. Simply, when you have a higher profit from selling the product in the local market compared to exporting this product to foreign countries and get a foreign exchange revenue and then convert this into Sri Lankan rupee and compare, and that profit is lower than by the profit by selling in the local market, then there is an anti-export bias existing in the country. So that is what simply, in a simple terms or simple words, you can explain. So people or the entrepreneurs, they produce goods and services, sell this product and get a profit. And when they sell in the local market, that will give them a profit. And when they export to the export market, then also they can get a profit. And these two profits are determined by various things. And when they compare the two profits, if the local profit is greater than the export profit, they will sell this in the local market rather than exporting them. And that is why it is known as anti-export bias. Now, why this is happening? Because of many reasons. Now, the producer is always compare the relative profitability. And the relative profitability depends on relative price, relative prices. So the relative prices are affected by very many things. Number one is the exchange rate. If they being exported, but you get an exchange rate. And then second, the incentives given to the export sector by the government. And also the protection given by the government to import competing sectors. So there are three aspects. Exchange rate is one aspect, and export incentives the second aspect, and the third aspect is the protection given by the government to the import competing sectors. Now, as a country, Sri Lanka, continually, you can see, even we liberalized in 1977, the country has been protecting the domestic market or domestic product by imposing heavy or high tariff rates and other barriers. And that creates the producer to produce an output which can be easily sold in the local market and get a higher profit under the protective environment. When you give an export subsidy or export incentive, and that is not adequate to compensate the bias existing in the domestic market. So therefore, the problem here is, one of the important problem here is Sri Lanka's trade policy in the past was creating this anti-export bias. And this anti-export bias is one of the reasons why Sri Lanka could not expand its export sector. And why Sri Lanka creating this anti-export bias in favor of local industries? Because Sri Lanka wanted to create or wanted to protect the local industries, because local producers are important for the economy. So you can see there is a conflicting interest or conflicting objective of a government. While want to increase the exports to the international market, they want to protect the local domestic industries as well. So these two are confronting with each other and creating this anti-export bias. So what is the meaning of this? If as long as you protect the domestic market more and more by giving protective measures, and that policy will create an anti-export bias of the tradable sectors. So which one you want? Export more and increase growth, or protect local industries and producing for the local market and sustain the economy? So these two premises are there. These two are opposing interest, and making a balance between the two is extremely difficult. And countries have succeeded this, put a balance in favor of export industries at the right time and diversified their export sector, and they had succeeded. While Sri Lanka wanted to protect our domestic industries, domestic market, and that created this anti-export bias. And therefore, we still are facing this difficulty. Professor Sirimal has published this empirical thesis in late 90s or late 90s, but 20-30 years have been already passed, still we are having this anti-export bias due to government policies, including exchange rate policy and commercial policy. So therefore, a serious discussion on this anti-export bias is needed. Calculations you can make, of course, that can be done, which sector that anti-export bias is more or less, or which area the bias is not existing. So those kind of insight information you can obtain, and research institutes can do that, universities can do that. So whatever it is, ultimately it is going to be a political decision to be taken, whether to promote industries exports or promote local industries, import competing industries, and sustain the economy. So these are the two objectives, and these cannot be achieved at simultaneously. Thank you so much for your patience, and we will be able to discuss or argue or comment later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. We are hoping that it will be a catalyst for some fruitful discussion in the upcoming second session. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen, we have with us another individual, a talented economist, one whose opinions and views will no doubt be very enlightening and additive to what we already know about Sri Lanka's international trade. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Asanka Wijesinghe. Dr. Asanka Wijesinghe is a research fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka, or I would say IPS, with research interests in international trade, regional integration, and industrial policy. This research focuses on adjustment and distributional trade costs and trade policy impact on bilateral trade and GVC participation. Dr. Asanka also holds a BSc in Agricultural Technology and Management from the University of Peradeniya, and an MS in Agribusiness and Applied Economics from North Dakota State University, and an MS and PhD in Agricultural, Environmental and Development Economics from the Ohio State University. His latest research focused on the effect of trade policy on household food security, political preference for import controls, the impact of trade policy on GVC participation, and ex-ante evaluation of the impact of regional trade agreements. And with that, Doctor, it's over to you.
Thank you, Sahan. Okay, let me share the screen. Can you see this? Can you see the screen now?
Not yet, Doctor.
Okay, give me a minute. What is this? Okay, this one. Share. Okay, now can you see that?
Now it's
We can.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for the introduction. I will swiftly go to the discussion. First, I will talk about what is anti-export bias and how it suppresses growth, especially export growth. And measuring the uneven protection, that's important. We have this concept called effective protection rate. It is a bit different from the nominal rate of protection. And the impact of anti-export bias, what is happening in Sri Lanka, and what should be done, especially, it's also important to discuss. Okay, I see my slides. Okay. It's like, as Dr. Ganeshamoorthy also said, this depends on the relative price, export and import substitution at the domestic price fetched by the producers. So producers have a choice. It is mainly a maximization of profit. So they can decide whether to produce for the domestic market or export. So this anti-export bias is a function of the difference between the domestic price effect of import restrictions and the protective measures given to the industry, and export price effects of the import incentives. Yeah, this is, I don't know what is happening actually. Okay, it looks like this very slow. Okay. So export supply can be modeled as a function of price of the domestic price PD, export price PE, and also the other factors like the technology available in the country. When you can see the export supply is the elasticity is positive, that the derivative is positive with the export price, and it is negative when the domestic price is high. The domestic price is the world market price into the R is the exchange rate, and if there are tariff protection given, you can see that PDE is higher than the domestic, higher than the PW, and some countries follow export subsidies. Sri Lanka is not using that much those things, but China is a known example for this kind of subsidies. So the bias is actually the difference between the world market price into the exchange rate policy followed by the country and PD minus PE. Then we can define this bias as the excess of the domestic price over the effective export price relative to the local currency equivalent of the world price. If the domestic price is maintained high through tariffs, and not only tariff, non-tariff measures also act function as a tariff. It increases the domestic price, then it is an incentive to allocate domestic resources for the domestically consumed production. This is generally measured by the nominal rate of protection, basically the custom duties, but the true protection can be measured by effective rate of protection. Effective rate of protection factor in the distortions to the value chain. For example, we are using intermediates for the final goods production. Let's say, for example, rice. To produce the rice kilogram, we import fertilizer, pesticides like that. So what will happen if the intermediates are not subject to tax or tariff, but the final good is subject to tariff? Or what will be the situation if both final goods and intermediates are subject to a tariff? So this ERP measures the disincentive for the contribution of the primary factors toward export industries. This is really important. I will explain it in a simple example. For example, if there's a 10% tariff for rice kilogram, let's say it's 100, then the domestic price will be 110. You can calculate easily that the nominal protection will be 10. But just assume our domestic value addition is just 50. Then there is a protection given to this 50 rupees of domestic resources. Still, you can see that the protection is 10, and then the effective rate of protection is 20%. It implies that now the producers have more incentive rather than allocating resources for export-oriented industries, allocate resources for the domestically consumed industry. This simple calculation just to show what will happen if intermediates are also subject to the tariff, then this effect will be negated, and then the total effective rate of protection will be just zero, though nominal rate of protection exists. So this is important because in Sri Lanka, you know that most of the countries, not only Sri Lanka, intermediates are generally exempted from tariff, but final goods are subject to tariff. Then there is a effective rate of protection, very high protection for domestically consumed products. So what do we know about this nominal rate of protection and export effective rate of protection in case of Sri Lanka? We calculated these values at ISIC version 4-digit codes, sectors, industrial, internationally standard industrial classification. This is the classification used by DCS, most of the global level data sets, and also in the labor force service. So this classification is important. Calculating everything according to this classification is important. You can see bakery products, soft drinks, some foods items, tobacco products, wiring devices, their electronic part equipment, some food items like macaroni, noodles, clay building materials, furniture. They are subject to like 15 to 14% tariff by Sri Lanka. However, this average value masks huge variation at the tariff line level. You can see sometimes these tobacco products, they are subject to more than 100% tariff. Yeah, I think when someone needs to be admitted, the slides are not moving. That's, yeah. Okay. Okay. So yeah, again, someone needs. So this is a comparative picture of the tariff level in the countries of South Asia when compared to the other countries. You can see there is a huge tariff cut after maybe around 1990s. Sri Lanka did it early, but most of South Asian countries started phasing out tariff after 1990. We have come a long way, but still we as South Asian countries have not reached East Asia or Pacific level of nominal rate of protection. Yeah, so you can see the effective rate of protection given to different industries. For example, bakery products, porcelain, ceramic products, spirits, wines, vegetable and animal oil, fat, rice. They have high effective rate of protection than the nominal rate of protection. This 45-degree line is the equal line. So the Department of Census and Statistics calculated ERP once in 2015 using input-output tables. Processing and preserving of fruits and vegetables, bakery products, macaroni and noodles, similar furniture products, petroleum refractory products, porcelain, those products have very high effective rate of protection, not only agricultural products. This is very important because the agriculture sector is generally blamed for high protection, but it is not the case. There are a lot of domestic industries function or profit under this heavy protection given through tariff, non-tariff barriers, para-tariff, like that. Okay, so what is the impact? That's very important. One thing is weak participation in global value chains. When tariffs are there for different kind of products, then automatically it is a disincentive to join to the global value chain. And also, when we maintain very high domestic food price because of the protection given, it has a direct nutritional impact on the household. And again, as I said, anti-export bias due to resource misallocation. So this is the Sri Lanka's global value chain participation indices, forward global value chain participation and backward. You can see most of the countries have increased the participation to, from 2000 to 2019. But Sri Lanka's global value chain participation has gone down. This is because mainly due to the expansion of non-tradable sector of the country. You can see the trade openness. This solid black line is Sri Lanka's trade openness compared to Bangladesh, India, and overall South Asia. It was very high even when Sri Lanka was at 1960s before liberalization. But after the first wave of liberalization, it increased. Second wave of liberalization happened around 1990, 1991, those years. Again increase, but after 2005, you can see this is going down, trade openness to the level of Bangladesh, India, and South Asia, the countries which liberalized the economy much later than Sri Lanka. And also overall in South Asia, the tariff negatively affect GVC participation and bilateral trade. Unfortunately, RTS are also not helping much in South Asian countries because these RTS or FTS cannot be considered as RTS or FTS. There are a lot of regulator barriers attached to them. What is the impact on nutrition? So we published this paper about 2022, I think. We found that when households, poor households, incorporate more imported calories into their diet, they can be cost efficient. It means they can eat more calories for, let's say, I spend 1,000 rupees, someone else also spend 1,000 rupees for food, but I eat more imported calories, like instead of coconut oil, I eat palm oil, like that, and wheat products. So by that, I can eat more calories. So poor families design their diet in a way that to be cost efficient and eat more calories using imported calories. But unfortunately, now trade policy is pretty much biased against these imported calories. It will have a big impact on poor and especially food poor households, also urban sector households. This anti-export bias actually it increased in the pandemic also. Okay, so this is for me. It's 1 minute.
Yes, doctor.
Okay, I will finish it hurriedly. Basically, my point is, even in the pandemic, this anti-export bias increased. Earlier, when Sri Lanka started to face this economic crisis, even before that, what we did was hurriedly imposing a lot of import controls. So I will discuss what should we do to remove this anti-export bias in my next round. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Asanka, for that detailed explanation of your thoughts on the subject matter at hand. Ladies and gentlemen, now that we have heard from the first two of our panelists, let us now move on to the second round of discussion, where once again, each panelist will be able to comment on the views expressed by their fellow panelists, provide any additional information regarding their views, if they wish, and ultimately providing their stance on the matter. I look forward to the discussion that we will have in the next segment of today's event. However, a reminder to the panelists, for this segment, you will each have a duration of 10 minutes for this round. Once again, alerts pertaining to the amounts of the time remaining will be given via the chat box. First, when 5 minutes have elapsed, the second when 9 minutes have elapsed, and finally the last one when all 10 minutes have elapsed. We can perhaps start according to the order that we went earlier, and also, okay, we are going to start with Ms. Subhashini. So joining us in the second round, we have a very versatile economist, an individual who has always made time to attend our events and share her thoughts and knowledge with everyone in the audience. She's, of course, none other than Ms. Subhashini Abeysinghe. Ms. Subhashini Abeysinghe is an economist specializing in international trade. She's an expert on the Sri Lankan economy, private sector development, trade policy, the WTO, regional trade agreements, ports, and logistics. In addition to this, her current research includes a data-driven analysis of China's economic engagement in Sri Lanka. She has a bachelor's degree in economics, first class honors, a master's degree in economics from the University of Colombo, Sri Lanka, and a master's degree in international law and economics from the World Trade Institute, University of Bern, Switzerland. Ms. Subhashini is currently working as a director of research at Verite Research, a research and strategy firm based in Colombo. She has worked for the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce for nearly 10 years as a senior economist. She has also worked as a visiting lecturer at the Faculty of Graduate Studies of the University of Colombo and Sir John Kotilawala Defence University in Sri Lanka. Ms. Abeysinghe, it is wonderful to have you with us here today. And with that, I'd like to pass the floor to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And so I would like to respond to some of the comments made by the previous speakers, and also try to quickly give some of my views on the topic. So firstly, I think one of the questions that are often hear, or one of the arguments that often hear in this whole anti-export bias conversation, is the importance of protecting domestic industry. And it's a difficult challenge to select, are you going to promote exports? Are you going to protect domestic industry? And we seem to think that these are somehow contradictory or conflicting views. But I think there is quite a lot of experience and research that is being done out there that shows actually they need not be contradictory. They can complement each other. And where we start is actually by looking at outcomes we expect from industrial policy or a trade policy in a country. So the outcomes we want in promoting industry, whether it's by export or domestic market, is really that these industries are efficient, competitive, produce high quality products at competitive prices, are able to create good jobs, that well-paying jobs, and able to basically increase incomes of people and standards of living of people, right? So if you look at the outcome, obviously, the choice is very easy because Sri Lanka is a very small market of 20 million people. We cannot really achieve the quality, the competitiveness, the productivity, and even generate sufficient revenue to be able to provide high quality, high paying jobs if we are exclusively concentrated in producing and supplying a domestic market. It's not only that the domestic market is small, the income levels of people are low, which means the prices, products that are destined for domestic market can fetch is low. So you will be compelled to produce products at low prices and to a volume of consumers that are low. That means your revenue generated is far smaller compared to what you can do if you're a supplier to the international market. Your consumers the numbers are large, and you can reach to very high end consumers that can pay higher prices, which means you're able to generate more revenue, create more employment, and be able to pay better for your workers. Take tea, for example. We are very proud of Ceylon tea. We obviously want to be exporting Ceylon tea, but imagine being having to sustain a sector that can't even pay 1,000 rupees a day to its workers. Is that the kind of industry we want to protect and continue? Is that the kind of quality of life and the income we want to give to people who work in the industry? And can we call ourselves a developed country, or even have aspirations to be a developed country, if we are going to depend heavily on a sector like that for our export revenue? So these questions, this is exactly why countries like, we all talk about South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong as the countries that went from being low-income countries to high-income countries within a very short period in the history, in the economic history of the world. How they did is they made that choice. They decided, look, we have small countries, very small markets. Look at Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, they're tiny markets. They knew, oh, if we are going to produce for our domestic market, we're not going to succeed. And that's why they just let go of what we call import substitution industry, which in Sri Lanka we still talk about to this date, and decided, no, we want to create internationally competitive companies. We want our companies to succeed in the international market, and that is why they went from promote. You provide one of the ways to promote is, first thing you do is you reduce cost of doing business, right? So you reduce cost of doing business and make it very easy for people to invest, introduce very efficient processes, you have very efficient streamlined systems, and you encourage investments, and you make it very easy to access raw material and export products. Then secondly, you also support these companies with right technology by investing in education, so that your companies have very good skilled labor. Today, if you're if you're someone who's following this whole geopolitical rivalry of China and India and China and USA, and talk about the semiconductor and chip industry, right? And how did Taiwan create Taiwan, a tiny country, became the country that supplied 50% of advanced industrial chips in the world? They did it not just by looking at this, by actually investing heavily in education, heavily in skills, massive investments in scientific skills, so that their companies have readily accessible labor. So I think I know I have only 10 minutes. So just to quickly wrap, to realize that actually it is a very easy choice, but it's not something that we feel our domestic industries protection is somehow something that conflicts with export promotion, not necessarily. And also some of the things that other countries did, because you can't do it overnight. We understand there are a lot of political challenges. We're working in a very politically sensitive environment when it comes to domestic industries. There are a lot of vested interests. There is a lot of lobbying against liberalization. So one of the ways most of these countries worked around it is actually creating this, what you call free trade zones or special economic zones, because introducing countrywide reforms and changes are very difficult. The countries came, actually it was the East Asian countries like Taiwan, China, South Korea that came with the concept of special economic zones, free trade zones, where they thought, okay, we will have at least create certain spaces where cost of exporting is going to be low, cost of doing business is going to be low, where there is free trade, you can import freely, you can export freely, the taxes are very low, the procedures and processes are streamlined. Sri Lanka started that experiment in 70s, but if you look at the export processing zones today, they have become not very export friendly or business friendly or investment friendly. They have gone back in terms of facilitating investments to facilitating trade, to become more policing of these investments and trade, and the corruption and red tape has increased. And as a result, we are not seeing that many companies wanting to get into export-oriented sector. So I'll stop there. Maybe if there is any opportunity to come back, happy to join the discussion again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Abeysinghe. We are very grateful for your insight on the matter. We are sure that our audience will ponder upon the knowledge that you have imparted on us. Moving on, let us hear from our next panelist, Dr. Ganeshamoorthy. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for the second round. Yes. Import protection as export promotion was a strategy adopted by some countries in East Asia. some have been very successful. In doing so, they have selected industries. So for a country to promote an industry, it has to select an industry which has an export potential and support it. And when you get some information from or details from the successful stories or the so-called Asian miracle countries, targets were set and then support were given to the industries. And in case of South Korea, they have started with export promotion with the support of foreign investment, but latter stage they have protected their domestic market from foreign competition. So that is there. But in the case of Sri Lanka, the problem is the industries that have been selected for protection were not export competitive, or they are neither they are producing a high value product for exports. And we know that the investment per se in human capital development in Sri Lanka, many are taking a kind of a view that 6% of the GDP should be invested in education. But that does not automatically create any kind of impact unless otherwise there's a serious reform in the academic sector, education sector. A country which produce human capital and allow them to migrate to other countries without knowing how to use the human capital already produced, we cannot expect that the country, even we invest in 6% on education, will make a difference. So the serious problem in the country is that the foreign direct investment is welcome, but the business environment is not created. And one of our previous speakers said that the export processing zones have become redundant and then lost their steam, and then they become neither productive or efficient. And then, so what is the purpose of having those areas to protect the domestic market, producing for the domestic market and exporting a few, weak manufacturing goods into other countries? So the world is changing. Already we have many competitors in the region as well as outside the region. So therefore, we need to change our modalities. Export promotion has to happen within the realm of value chains and production networks. And as a country, small country with a small market, domestic market, we will not support. So they are, at the same time, Sri Lanka is unable to attract larger investors who can allocate their production in here and then export to other countries. So what is feasible for Sri Lanka practically is to join the growing production networks and value chain, for which also the country needs foreign investment. So in order to attract foreign investment, there are quite a lot the country has to do. We know that there are quite a lot of foreign companies have shown interest in investing in Sri Lanka, but we know that there are obvious obstacles from the economic front and also from the political front existing in the country. So without removing those obstacles, it's very difficult to invite any foreign direct investor to come and invest and in the component industry or part industry or intermediate goods industry. So that is the hope for Sri Lanka, and also the services sector rather than the industrial sector. The services sector can provide a kind of a boost for Sri Lanka's future exports. I think the industrial sector, in terms of intermediate goods, need to be considered. And food prices are very high in Sri Lanka due to the protection given to the domestic producers. Of course, that is true partially because food producers, they will get a price which is not the price that we pay in the market. The middlemen are getting the highest profit out of it, and the farmers are still poor. The customers are paying a higher price, and the middlemen get the larger chunk of the profit. So these are practical issues and practical problems. So this has to be taken in discussion like this and more discussion in other fora. And also this should be gone to the policymakers at the policymaking level. Whatever as educationists and also students and researchers, what we do, if these are not taken as input for real policy making, this will be remaining as books and just discussions and conference papers and conference proceedings, etc., etc. But serious effort on Sri Lanka's industrial development need to be done, and anti-export bias has to be removed by concentrated policies. It is a country which can produce high-valued goods with this high-valued human capital. I would say there are many criticisms against Sri Lankan labor or human capital, which is redundant and they couldn't work, and then the efficiency levels are very much lower. I don't agree with that, because Sri Lankan laborers or Sri Lankan human resource, when they move outside Sri Lanka, they perform well and they shine. So therefore, the problem is not with the human capital what we are preparing or producing, but the opportunities given to them and the level playing field, which is important for them to use their abilities and qualification in order to contribute to the national economy. And that change has to happen in the country. And then the export sector may grow, and hopefully there are a lot of efforts need to be done, like not only from the universities, but also from other stakeholders in the economy. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Doctor. We are very appreciative of the knowledge that you have shared with us. Now, let us hear from our final panelist, Dr. Asanka Wijesinghe.
Yeah, Sahan, thank you. I will use some minutes to complete that, what I was talking. As I said, this anti-export bias could be seen even in the COVID era protectionist measures. Sometimes it can be argued like they were temporary measures. But when Sri Lanka had like 7 billion foreign reserves, at that point, there were policy options. For example, taking assistance from multilateral institutes or increasing the interest rate. But none of them were implemented. Instead of that, this low interest rate regime was maintained, and also exchange rate was pegged at 200. To control this, to help this policy regime, import controls were maintained. You can see this red line, how import controls increased over time. Most of them are now actually phased out. But this shows that early in 2020 also, Sri Lanka's policymakers' mindset was towards this anti-export bias, anti-export and also import promoting policy. Okay, so what should be done? As I always say, diagnosis is not that hard. We see the problem as economists. But do we see the answer? What should be done? So these are the questions most of the time policymakers ask. Okay, tell us what should we do? Well, the overall picture of Sri Lanka's great entanglement is this: we have a low productivity labor force in agriculture, about 25%, and also low productive domestic industry. Politicians' objective function interfere, and protection given to agriculture sector and other different sectors. So this creates high food prices, retention of agricultural labor force in the agricultural sector, and as I showed, the calorie consumption inefficiencies. This all contribute to sluggish industrial growth. Again, this generates low income level. This is like a vicious cycle. Sri Lanka is trapped in this cycle. To do what we should do, we should remove the anti-export bias, our trade policy should be neutral, should be given a similar incentive package for import, the domestic industries as well as export industries. However, for example, let's take agricultural sector. It is very difficult to do this because beyond this Western province, it is predominantly agricultural country still. So you can see some of the districts is still 50% of the population is in agricultural sector. Labor force is in agricultural sector. When it comes to politics, this is very important because most of the districts, the winner's margin in election is less than 5% in a closely competed election. So for politicians, this removing the protection and phasing out is a daunting task. And also, I think that figure is not there, but we can show that the nominal rate of protection given to the industries and the labor force participation in these industries, there's a positive correlation. It means that politicians are giving high protection to the sectors that employ more population. Maybe there is an electoral incentive. We suggest in our recent research chapter I wrote, we need to first remove the import controls imposed in the COVID era and also SCLs, but this should be sequential. It is very difficult to do overnight because of the political backlash possible. It's a no common thing in every country. Like people are not passive; they respond electorally if the livelihoods are challenged. However, effectiveness of FTAs, I always have this issue. It is a second best approach for the policymakers because across the board tariff overhaul is not possible in Sri Lanka due to the political concerns. So FTAs have become the second best option, but we want to make sure this FTAs actually remove the anti-export bias. It is not the case. Most of the time, intermediates are exempted from tariff. Some final products. Most of the important, highly protected products are included in uncommitted, sensitive, or negative lists. So this FTA approach should be scrutinized. We need a modern industrial policy. I want to emphasize that because the industrial policy we know is something practiced in 1970 to 1977, giving import protection, like you impose very high tariff on import competing products. It should not happen. Most of these examples, especially East Asian countries, South Korea, there are many empirical work, research done that this infant industrialization hypothesis, those are not valid. They are kind of refuted. South Korea in 1960s, they introduced this realistic exchange rate regime, neutral trade policy. That's how they achieved this export growth. This heavy chemical industries, these are the industries South Korea started as government promoted industries. They were not that successful. And they were introduced much later phase of South Korea's industrialization. So you can read this, Professor Premchand Atikurla and Dr. Sarath Rajapathy, they wrote a book about this new industrialization arguments, refuting them. I don't remember the book title. It's the Oxford Press published book. It might be available in library. So most important thing is removing the anti-export bias, providing a neutral trade policy. Then Sri Lanka's labor force, capital, land will be allocated to areas Sri Lanka can competitively produced area sector. However, industrial policy has a role. For example, if you look at the modern economic theory, economic discussions, professors like Danny Rodriguez and Mariana Mazzucato, they promote industrial policy, but that industrial policy is not the industrial policy Sri Lanka followed in 1977. It is more like bottom to top approach, talking with the business firms, asking, okay, what do you need? Maybe it is simply technical assistance to get certification or some credit assistance. Okay, those things are the industrial policy instruments. But picking industries, identifying industries, and giving protection is never going to work because government or policymakers do not have that information, that market information. Always picking industries will lead to corruption, providing incentives to politically lobbying groups. For example, you can, if you are interested, you can read this Protection for Sale. It was a very nice paper written by Gosman and Helpman around 1990, I think 1994. It's a theoretical paper. Then Gandhi and Badyopadhyay, they in 1997 empirically proved that the protection given to the industries in the US are correlated with the campaign financing given to the political party. So that is how this protection, again, there is no economic rationale. We can talk about these things, but when we implement, that's going to happen. That's what's going to happen. So most realistic approach is phasing out these distortions step by step. It is a long process. Even free trade agreements, we can see the tariff phase out is like for 20 years. It is good. We should identify the political constraint to do that overnight. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Asanka Wijesinghe. The knowledge you have bestowed on us will undoubtedly act as a catalyst for further discussions regarding the matter at hand. That brings us to the end of the second segment of our discussion. As we proceed to the last segment of our webinar, the Q&A session, we will now open the floor to the audience. If you wish to vocalize your question, should you have one, kindly use the raise hand option. I hope you know how to use the raise hand option in the Zoom. When vocalizing your questions, please specify if you prefer a response from a specific panelist or if it's directed to all three panelists. And also, in the course of the first and second rounds, we have received a few questions via the chat box so far. However, before we get to them, does anyone in the audience have a question that they would like to vocalize? If there are no questions from the audience that they would like to vocalize, we can perhaps take a look at the questions that we have received via the chat box. Okay, the first question that we have received, it's directed to Ms. Subhashini. So I'm going to call the question as itself. Does the anti-export bias affect all export sectors in Sri Lanka equally? If not, can you elaborate on which sectors are most disadvantaged and why? I repeat the question. Does the anti-export bias affect all export sectors in Sri Lanka equally? If not, can you elaborate on which sectors are most disadvantaged and why?
So anti-export bias in general, when you say affect all sectors, it's about incentives, right? It's not about sectors. So when you see certain sectors get protection, when you want to invest and produce, you would rather go into sectors and products where there is protection. So there is greater incentive for you to, because you find it more profitable to produce for the domestic market, right? So then it's not sectoral, you're basically incentivizing companies or investors to go into sectors that are domestic market oriented and heavily protected. So that's one way how anti-export bias affects basically the incentive to get into sectors that produce for export market. So you're disincentivized. But of course, tariff protection differs across, if you're looking at anti-export bias in terms of tariffs, I'm sure tariff protection varies across sectors. Certain sectors actually have very low taxes. Actually, apparel sector in Sri Lanka, for a long time, why apparel sector, of course, it is creeping in a bit now, but for a long time, why apparel sector succeeded is because at the time, the government decided to sort of promote or select apparel as a sector to export to produce for the export market. There was drastic reductions in taxes on inputs, right? So that's why a lot of textile mills had to close down because they were producing very high price fabrics that are low quality. And as a result, with that kind of protection, you could not create a export garment sector. So you could see that certain sectors where there was government policy targeted actually led to removal of anti-export bias and thereby encourage sectors. So to this date, apparel remains export-oriented sector, but it is becoming not very competitive in Sri Lanka for many other reasons, right? Again, this is exactly my first point, that actually you can't succeed, you can't succeed if your sectors, even if they're export oriented, are continuously depending on low cost labor, low skilled labor for their competitiveness. Sri Lanka's current export basket is really heavily reliant on low skilled, low wage sectors and labor intensive sectors, and that is not sustainable, and Sri Lanka is increasingly uncompetitive in these sectors, and Sri Lanka has not transitioned into more high competitive sectors. There are the anti-export bias actually comes in terms of investment barriers rather than trade barriers, while trade barriers play an important role as well, because I think everybody was talking about, so we are talking about new sectors, right? The Sri Lanka as a country, for example, is not a major producer of electronic products, components and parts. So if you want to encourage, you want to bring investments, and those investments will come into countries there more than the tariffs. What is really important is really the ability to import and export product inputs, right? So basically how electronic industry works is it's a very highly fragmented production network where different parts and components of a mobile phone or a computer is manufactured in multiple countries. So if you want to join a production network like this, your country must have very efficient borders where you can bring in parts, add value, and export with very little time and low cost. That is where Sri Lanka's anti-export bias in there comes in, because Sri Lanka's border agencies are very inefficient, ineffective. We have significant policy inconsistencies, whether it's taxation or otherwise, which discourages companies from wanting to have factories that connect to their production networks in a country like Sri Lanka. Secondly, the investment barriers, where basically it is very difficult to start a investment in Sri Lanka, from land allocation to approvals to permits to taxation to inconsistency to time to bureaucracy to corruption. It highly discourages foreign investors from wanting to come and operate in Sri Lanka. So I think those are new sectors. So there are lots of barriers that create a bias against export-oriented investments from coming into Sri Lanka. It's very difficult to identify sectors as such, because anti-export bias is about incentives, right? Incentives into whether you want to produce for domestic market or produce for export market. I hope I answered that question.
Thank you so much, Ms. Subhashini, for that brilliant answer. So we have another question that we have received in the chat box, and that is directed to Dr. Ganeshamoorthy. So the question is, can you elaborate on the specific policies or factors that contribute more significantly to the anti-export bias in Sri Lanka's trade environment? Are there recent studies or data that quantify the impact of these bias on export performance? I hope the question was clear to Dr. Ganeshamoorthy.
Can you read the question again, please?
Sure, Doctor. So the question is, can you elaborate on the specific policies or factors that contribute more significantly to the anti-export bias in Sri Lanka's trade environment? Are there recent studies or data to quantify the impact of this bias on export performance?
Well, there is no kind of a this policy has contributed more and this policy has contributed less. Like all that is the incentive package and also the sectors or the product received from the government. So whichever sectors, especially for example, food production, we have agricultural policies and food security aspects. So the imported food prices are very much cheaper than the producing at home. But the protection is given to the domestic agriculture, which is reasonable and which is also from a food security perspective, which is very natural any government to produce give protection for the agriculture sector, even in Western countries, that is quite common. But the problem here is when you have that kind of a domestic market with a high price, then there is no incentive for you to export. So it's very difficult to identify by product, but the government policy is some areas, some sectors to protect the domestic industry. Agriculture is one, and then the incentive given to exporters are not targeting with export performance, but just giving a kind of a tax holiday or a subsidy or an incentive. Subsidies are not given, but some tax holidays and incentives are given to get the exporters to export. And there are various other barriers for an exporter to experience. Other than the tariff barriers, but the procedural barriers are there. And there where the trade facilitation comes. So the institutional barriers and administrative barriers and various other barriers that are existing against the export sector. So therefore, it's hard to say that this incentive or this protection measure has led to high rate of protection or high rate of anti-export bias. So that sort of analysis has not been done yet. Maybe in future somebody will do it and then explain it, and then even in that case, the effective rate of protection and nominal rate of protection, that sort of industrial inputs can be given, but that is not completed one. So the export bias, anti-export bias, and domestic protection has to be taken as a kind of a separate study, and then with the component with the products basket, it can be calculated and further exploration could be done. But as of now, we don't know kind of products that are existing with high, heavy anti-export bias and sectors or products even more protection than others like. So economy-wide segregation, yes, incentive packages are there and protection measures are there, and as a result, Sri Lanka's export has become the bias against the anti-exports are there in the Sri Lankan economy. But individual product-based research has to be done. Perhaps the students who have made this comment could do that for their economic research or their dissertation. Perhaps that will bring more information on that. So you may think about it. As of now, we don't have that kind of broader information with greater detail.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, sir. Okay. We have another question, and that is directed to Dr. Asanka. So the question is, how can the country move towards both domestic production and competitive exports in the long run?
Sorry, San, I want to ask you to repeat it. I don't know, it was only for me, but voice was a bit vague.
Yeah, I will show. So the question is again, considering Sri Lanka's economic goals, how can the country move towards a more balanced trade environment that fosters both domestic production and competitive exports in the long run?
Yeah. Well, there are no like out of the box solutions for this kind of things. If you look at Sri Lanka's tariff structure, you can see domestically consumed industries are protected and they are not competitive in the global standard. So theoretically, what we should do is remove this bias. Then the resources will be allocated in more productive sectors. It should be a gradual process. For example, let's see, Sri Lanka has no comparative advantage in producing crops like potato, okay? But removing it is a very big political issue. That's why countries have trade adjustment package all around the world. Okay, then now protection will be removed, phase out tariff protection I'm talking about. Then these firms, producers can be given the required skill set to move to another sector. Maybe some other manufacturing sector. Domestic production, when we talk about, it is true that we cannot export everything we produce. It is not going to happen. Especially when it comes to the agricultural sector. Agricultural sector modernization is very important. Identifying the crops through stakeholder consultation. It's not by doing by the government, okay, let's go this crop. It's what happened historically. Like even rice, it is kind of a politician's dream to achieve self-sufficiency. This modernization is can be done training the farmers, giving the required skills to increase their productivity, and also removing the policy distortions like land policy. I have seen right now the government is giving this outright land ownership to the farmers. In the dry zone, most of these lands are given as a permit. This permit cannot be used as a collateral. So this household is facing a credit constraint. Without a collateral, you cannot get credit. And also the productive farmers could not increase the landholding size because there was no land market. When the domestic distortions like land policy are removed, then more efficient productive farmers will produce productively for the domestic market. It's fine. Agriculture, I don't think will be liberalized 100% in any country because of the national security reasons and food security reasons. FDI, attracting FDI is a very debated topic actually. Sometimes in empirically what we have seen is rather than this like paperwork kind of policies, facilitation measures, macroeconomic stability is very important to attract the investments. High inflation, diagnostic study, it's available online what to do this in this labor market, also the land market like that. In a nutshell, what I can say is gradually phasing out the existing paratariff and bringing down the tariff lines to a low level. I'm not saying zero, it is not going to happen. And remove the quantitative barriers like licensing requirements, okay, other existing non-tariff measures. The imposed SCLs, special commodity levies, removing them gradually will neutralize the trade incentives in a way that Sri Lanka's labor force, capital, and land will be allocated in more competitive sectors in the long run. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for your response. So before moving forward with the other questions that we have received in the chat box, I'm again asking the audience, is there anyone who's wishing to vocalize their questions? We would really love to hear your voices as well. Okay, if not, we will move on to the next question. It's once again to Ms. Subhashini. So the question is, under the current political climate, are we seeing a change in the anti-export bias?
So political climate can actually work against removal of anti-export bias as well. So I don't know what you mean by current political climate. So currently we are we are expecting an election, right? So one of the things maybe we've agreed under the IMF program is to remove all of these para-tariffs and phase them out. Like other speakers said, these are politically unpopular decisions, and frequently what happens also is when one government removes these, what we notice is the next government that comes sort of almost campaign saying, I will protect the domestic industry, I will increase these taxes, I will increase tariffs. And there has been frequent, that is why we say policy inconsistency, and that is very bad for business. And as a result, people don't want to invest in countries like that because the environment is so unpredictable. You think, oh, the taxes are removed, I can start this production, or I can do this investment, and then after 3-4 years, another government comes and then imposes these taxes. So this kind of policy is very bad for investment. So what happens during election times is generally if one government is on a liberalization path, the other opposition parties that campaign is, in most instances in Sri Lanka's history, have campaigned saying we promise to increase. So in the current political climate, it's especially challenging because we are not our companies are not operating under a normal economic situation. They've been battered by multiple crises, and they are basically functioning in a very difficult environment, sometimes not because of their own fault, because of bad decisions taken by our governments that basically that resulted in this crisis. And at a time like this, where they have high levels of debt, inability to service their loans, all of that, they have lost their markets. They were just trying to survive after going through a COVID crisis, after economic crisis. So at a time like this, when somebody tells you, I'm going to liberalize the imports, right? And now you're struggling to survive, and you're almost being told that now cheaper imports will come from abroad. Obviously, there'll be, even under normal circumstances, when the SMEs and domestic industries operating under generally decent economic conditions, there will be protest. But under these dire circumstances, and with increasing taxes, increasing electricity prices, increasing fuel prices, it's like one shock after the other, and there is more likely less appetite and less support for economic reforms. So this is a very, very challenging place, because you need to do the reforms maybe to get the country on track, but at the same time, like Asanka said, there is a need to also see how can you cushion that blow on the domestic industry, the workers, how can you reduce the pain, right? So this is a very difficult time, near election times in Sri Lanka, always difficult for reform agenda and very bad for reform agenda. But this is where we keep on emphasizing the importance of, like Asanka said, maybe active labor market policies, where you support workers who are losing employment to find other employment, to provide some income support during that period. And also social safety nets, right? Because a lot of informal workers, a lot of people can get into, lose their income, lose their jobs. And as a result, social safety nets and income support from the government is critical. So without that kind of support, we need to cushion the blow, because we are talking about people who will undergo suffering, who has undergone immense suffering in the last so many years. But unfortunately, maybe where we are unhappy is how those kind of support mechanisms are being unrolled, how fair, how equal those are, and how less political intervention are into these social safety nets and other support programs is important, but definitely a very challenging environment for economic reforms.
Thank you so much, Miss. That was a wonderful answer. Okay, so that wraps up the Q&A session and brings an end to today's discussion. I'd like to extend my gratitude to our panelists for their valuable insights, and to our audience for their engaging questions. I'll now hand over the session to Tarini, our compeer. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Sahan Jayalat, and it was a privilege being your moderator for today's event. Tarini, it's over to you.
Thank you, Sahan. And with that, we've come to the end of a very eye-opening and riveting discussion. I would like to take a moment to thank our esteemed panelists, Dr. Asanka Wijesinghe, Ms. Subhashini Abeysinghe, and Dr. Ganeshamoorthy. Before we wrap up, however, I would like to hand it over to Sulangi Thambalina to present the vote of thanks. Sulangi.
Thank you, Tarini. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Economic Students Association of the University of Colombo, I would like to extend my gratitude to our panelists for their time, effort, and their insightful contribution. I also want to thank the head of the Department of Economics at the Faculty of Arts, Professor Chandana Aludge, Senior Treasurer of the Economic Students Association, Mr. Umesh Moramudali, and all the lecturers and non-academic staff for their unwavering support and guidance in ensuring the success of today's event. And also, a special thanks goes to the organizing team of today's webinar and to the Economic Students Association itself for their dedication in putting together today's event. And of course, last but not least, a big thank you to our audience for their participation in this insightful discussion. I will pass the session once again to Tarini, wishing you all a pleasant evening and a great weekend ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sulangi. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You've been a lovely audience. Please do stay tuned for the next session organized by the Economic Students Association of the University of Colombo. Until then, thank you and have a pleasant evening. Good night.
Thank you.